Hi there friends, this is Brent, the productivity coach. So whenever I start these videos with you, what I always want to do is I want to chunk up to what I consider to be the highest priority and the most important thing, which as far as I'm concerned is the actualization of our potential. But I don't think I ever explained why this matters so much to me and why I care so much about it. So what I want to do is I want to share with you a little bit about myself and why I'm just so fucking hot on this topic. And then what I want to do is I want to segue into the deepest and most profound insight that I've ever received on this subject. It is indeed the deepest level that of wisdom that I've accessed in this area, and one that I've been needing personally a lot. And since receiving it and since sort of getting a chance to marinate in it, I've arrived at this position of so much more comfort and centeredness about the whole thing, and it makes me really excited to share it with you. So follow me along on this journey. As always, I promise to do my best not to go too long, but sometimes I do run pretty long. Nevertheless, I believe you will be handsomely rewarded for sticking through this with me. So without further ado, I'm going to get into it. So, why I'm always on this topic about the actualization of your potential? Well, the reason being is that as a kid, I was one of these gifted kids. That's sort of a label that was put on me. I had a lot of talent in a lot of areas, and whereas that was pretty cool and it was interesting and nice to perform, say music. I was a pianist. Something that I was told a lot was that I had a lot of potential, and people would look at me and talk about all the potential that I had in this lifetime and about how great I would be and all this kind of cool stuff that I'd be able to do. And so that was pretty good. And like, I took a lot of that to heart and I created a bit of an identity around it. And it was really safe and good to be in school, to be in elementary and then later high school and later post-secondary, to just go about my life with this sense of potential and purpose, but mostly potential. Just like, I'm going to do this, this, and that. I'm going to do this, this, and that. And I have, there's all this stuff that I'm going to be able to do. And I'm going to be rich and successful and no. And so that went on for a long enough period of time. But then once school was over, then suddenly, maybe there's like this year where I could just kind of chill and not care too much. But then after that 1 year, the question began to surface of, okay, like, what is it going to take to actually actualize it? What is it going to take to actually do the thing, to actually turn this potential into real life reality? And I went this whole time thinking that it would be a really simple matter of just like, once you get out into the world, you manifest your potential. But then, when all that was over and all the school stuff was over and this sort of track that I was on was over, I didn't really actually have a sense of what I needed to do at all. Furthermore, all of my attempts at doing something, so all of my attempts at being disciplined and starting some sort of project, whereas I thought it would be a really easy process of just starting something, doing it, and then completing it and succeeding and having it make money and having it bring me all this excellence and success that I knew that was rightfully mine, I actually found it was really difficult to do these things. And I found that I was running into a lot of failure and a lot of challenge. And in particular, really running into problems with persistence and sticking through with things and getting myself to do what I needed to do. So then, this created a drama that would underlie my entire psychology up until present time, where now finally the psychology is starting to dissolve, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And so the drama was this idea of like who I was supposed to be and the level I was supposed to be operating at, and who I actually was and the level I actually was operating at, and there being this gap and needing to close that gap and needing to operate at that level. So needing to get myself to do more stuff. And so that's why, like, if you've immersed yourself in any of my content, especially a lot of the earlier stuff, it was like, this whole thing was a study of how to get yourself to do the thing, because it was just this big mystery that I, and a lot of people I ended up working with, were having a difficult time solving. So there were kind of a few psychological tenets underneath this drama, one being not enoughness. So just whatever I did wasn't enough, my effort wasn't enough, I wasn't trying hard enough, I wasn't being smart enough, I wasn't reading enough, I'm not being healthy enough. There's just all sorts of not enoughness that was just constantly emerging from within my psychology and in the form of an accusation toward me, which is brutal. In addition to that, there was a sense of time running out. So in addition to that, there was this sense of time running out, and this was an even more brutal one than the one before, where it's like time is running out. The window is closing. I'm running out of life. I'm running out of day. I'm running out of, the hour's already passed. I'm, wasting time on this thing that I'm not supposed to be wasting time on. And there was just constantly this accusation of wasting my time. I'm constantly accusing myself of wasting time and not using it properly, and thus not being able to step into the fullest possible life that I possibly could, and thus robbing myself of the success that I otherwise could have if I could just hunker down and do it. So I would pass through waves over my life of productivity, hyper productivity, where it's like, oh, I'm like really on the horse and I'm really doing it. I'm working hard and I'm getting up on time, and I got my schedule, my routines and rituals and everything's in place. And then I'd run into these other periods of time where I just can't get myself to do it, and I'm wasting time, and it always, and sometimes I would be able to move things forward, but I would always imagine somewhere that I must be able to really fly, to really move, to really kind of move with great velocity and abandon, and really kind of live life in such a way that it's exciting and exhilarating, and I'm just doing all sorts of creation, and I just couldn't seem to access that, and I couldn't access the success and the financial getting the amount of money that I felt like I could. And so, then this would, be the cause of a lot of frustration as well. So, fast forward to, say, this week, where it was a really down week, and I was ill, and I had to cancel a bunch of sessions. And because I was ill, and kind of sort of like really sort of flu-y, and I'm getting fever sweats, I was sort of in a kind of a weird psychedelic state over the last week. In addition to that, I'm also part of Matt Kahn's program, where he's doing these healings, these like incredibly heart-centered healings. And I talk about Matt Kahn a lot because he's amazing. Kahn, if you want to hear about him, Matt Kahn. And immersing myself in the principles that he's offering in his program. And somewhere over the last week, I entered into this resolution that no matter what, it just became absolutely essential that I find a way to step beyond this painful psychology of not enoughness, of wasting time, of I'm letting myself down, I'm failing at the campaign of my own life, which is what I sometimes call it, the campaign of my own life. The whole thing I'm beginning to sense is a false psychology. It's not real, it's not true, it's not pointing me to anything truly useful that's truly serving my growth. I need to find a way to really bring it to a close. So as I was doing that, it occurred to me that the psychology itself of not enoughness and behindness and time running out, that these are not my psychologies in the sense that they're not exactly native to me. They don't belong to me. They don't make sense for me. They never did. They're not correct for me. They're not life-affirming for me. So these are not my psychologies. And instead, it's just something that has appeared in my mind that I've grokked inadvertently. Just over the course of my life, I just fell prey to it. I became hypnotized by it, but none of it is actually true. And so I thought, okay, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. And so one way of disabusing yourself of psychology that's not yours this is a really powerful technique, is you just close your eyes and you look at it and step back and look at it and just give it permission to be there. And just affirm to yourself, like, this is just psychology that is presently healing within me. It's just presently moving. It doesn't have anything to do with me. And to say this out loud, to look at painful psychology and say, this has nothing to do with me. It doesn't belong to me. It's not of me. It releases you of the compulsion to fight it, to argue with it, to debate with it, to try to get rid of it, to try to fix it. It's just something that's in your presence. That it's almost like something in your garden, some kind of plant in your garden that you've just been watering with your attention, and it keeps growing because you keep watering it. And it's like, oh, I see. I can just let it be there. I don't have to do anything about it. All I have to do is just stop watering it, and it'll go away on its own, because anything else I try to do will only continue to reinforce it in place. So I'm just gonna let it be, and let it be as it is, and it'll sort itself out. So, okay. So I started applying all of this to that painful psychology. Are we still on the same page here? There's a few different things, but to kind of get back on the track here, it's like the psychology of not enough, like whatever I do is not enough. The psychology of I'm wasting time all the time and I'm not going fast enough. And the psychology of I need to get to where I'm supposed to be and I'm not where I'm supposed to be. Like, so this sort of psychology is false. It's not true. It doesn't belong to me. And so I don't have to believe it anymore. So, okay, so that's kind of what I realized. Now there's this whole other realization. If the first part is that's the negative teaching, like the negative being like, okay, none of this is true, this is false, this doesn't belong to me, fine. Well, then what do we replace it with? What's the positive psychology that we replace it with instead? And so this is when it starts to get really juicy. This is the part that I'm really, really excited to get to with you, which is when it comes to operating from your very best self, when it comes to being the greatest and fullest and most powerful, creative, free version of yourself, what we need to do in order to access this, in order to bring it about, in order to create it as our life, we need to step into that frame immediately. So the problem when it comes to attempting to operate at our highest potential is that we innocently find ourselves in an error, and the error is I'm here and the fullness of my potential is over here. And there's this sort of gap that I need to close in order to get there. We say stuff like, I'm behind, I'm not where I'm supposed to be, and so therefore I have to double down on my speed in order to close the gap, in order to get to it. That's what we say to ourselves. But when we do that, when we're in that psychology, we are rooting into a presupposition that we're not there. And because we're rooting into that presupposition, we are actually creating from it. And so therefore it creates this sort of a treadmill effect where where all we're doing is ever closing the gap, but never actually entering into the experience of having closed the gap, which is a totally different experience. So instead, because such masterful creators are we, and one really begins to appreciate this as we have these kinds of conversations, that we actually create our own struggle. It's possible to be addicted to struggle itself. So in order to really access this, we need to remember that we create our situation from the inside out. It's created with our imagination and our psychology. So how to access this then? So what we do is we can start with the question of, if you were really in the place of your dreams, like if you were really in a situation where you're just at the top of your game and you're exactly at the peak of your potential and you're living your life really at the peak of what's possible for you, what would that look like? What would that experience be like? And what would the experience be like if you were so right where you needed to be that there was nothing deficient about you anymore, and there's nothing not enough about you anymore, and you were just really just at the top, and instead of having a gap to close, you're just simply free to operate from here to do whatever you want? What would that be like? So the way we channel that is we say, since blank, how shall I operate? And this is the technique that I'm giving to you now. So it goes like this. Since I'm completely financially stable, how do I operate from here? we say, since I'm completely and financially stable, how do I operate from here? Or we say, since I'm incredibly productive and successful, what shall I do now? Or we might say, now that I've accomplished blank, 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 I've finished my art, I've created my business, it's now that it's done, what shall I do from here? And now you might be thinking, well, verily, Brent, these things are not the case. So how can I operate from here if I have not yet made my art or successfully created my business, or if I'm not as productive or whatever it is, if I'm not in the state? But the thing is, right, is that you and I, we're having a conversation on a very, very deep level, a very haric level. We're operating from the level of intention itself, from the level of creativity itself. And so what that means is we are disabusing ourselves from the presupposition that there's a distance between you and where you are, and we are instead rooting in the presupposition that the gap has been closed and it's done and you're there, I'm here. And we do that by saying, now that I'm successful, how shall I operate? And yet, like, there is a little bit of a leap of faith, a little bit of a leap of imagination that's required of you in order to properly step into it. But the thing is that once you do, then your imagination, instead of continuously creating the struggle of there being a gap and closing that gap, now it's free to create the experience that you actually want to step into, and so that you can actually embody it and operate from it. It's really cool stuff. And so a story just to illustrate this, because I know this is like a little bit intense and abstract and like, what the hell do I do with it? So I want to really kind of ground this for you. So here's a story from my fundraising days. I used to be a charity fundraiser before I became a coach. And what that meant was being on the street or in malls or later in an airport. And people would approach the booth and I would attempt to get them to sign up for a monthly donation to the charity that I was working for. And this can be incredibly taxing and incredibly difficult. And when I felt the most dismayed was when I would begin a shift in the morning and all the numbers are reset back to zero, and I would need to get donations for the day, and I would think to myself, well, how the hell am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to get a person to give me their credit card number so that I can sign them up for a charity? It feels impossible. And so what I did was I would look at the tablet, because we use these like tablets to enter people's information and credit card and whatever to sign them up, and seeing as it looks exactly the same that to have 0 donations as opposed to $10,000 in donations, like objectively, like it looks exactly the same either way, I can just enter into the reality that I now have $10,000 in donations and operate from here. So I'd have this moment, right, where I'd hold the tablet, I'd be like, oh, this is amazing. Now that I have $10,000, which I don't yet, but I'm mentally and with my imagination, I'm entering into that space, the space of it. Now that I have $10,000 in donations, what will I do now? How shall I operate from here? And so see, once again, we're taking this assumption and operating on top of the assumption. And so then I would ask so then like answers to the question would appear, and the answers to the question would be something like, well, I would focus on having fun with the people that come. I would focus on getting to know them and just having good conversations. I would focus on relaxing. I might spend the first hour sitting down and drinking coffee, and maybe I won't even do a lick of work at all. And so there's something really interesting that happens, because when we run this question, we say, now that I have blank, or now that blank is accomplished, how do I operate from here? We will do things that will make the psychology nervous, such as wasting time. If I say, like, I'm going to sit down and drink coffee and just relax, from the old perspective, the old psychology perspective of I need to close this gap, I'm behind, I'm running out of time, I'm not doing enough, that psychology would scream and say, no, we're running out of time. What are you talking about? There's no time to lose. We have to keep going. But But then what I would do instead, even though like that would kind of go off in my mind, I'd go, no, seeing as it's already done, I'm going to sit down and drink coffee, play a game on my phone and relax. And so when I would do that, I would set myself up to for the most harmonious way of receiving the donations. And I would find people that would just stop by the booth and easily they'd sign up, and I wouldn't have to argue, I wouldn't have to try to convince them. The whole thing would just be harmonious. And so that's how this kind of thing works, to operate on the level of intention, to operate from your imagination. So that's the technique. Now that I'm blank, or now that I've blank, what would I do? And I want to challenge you to try this out and to really actually do what you do if it were done, and really practice just operating from the frame of already having succeeded, and notice what happens. Notice if the results come in. And extra points if you leave a comment on this video, as well as a like, please and thank you. If you leave a comment to let us know about how it went. It's a very deep principle. So that's what I came here to say. I think that's what I got for you. There's a lot more to be said about how to create the vision. Like, we can talk a little bit later about how to really get a good solid idea of what your vision is for like life looking really good, and how to enter it into your imagination. We can talk about that a little bit later. We can talk a little bit about setting up a daily practice where you enter into it with your imagination. But I guess if I were to really summarize it and really make it concrete for you one more time, the takeaway is at least once per day for the next week. At least once per day for the next week, spend some time with the question of, now that blank, and in the blank you insert the reality that you want to create, or the type of success you want to create, or whatever the hell it is that you want to be real. Now that blank is real, what shall I do? How shall I operate? And then do that. There's so one and then two. One is now that blank, how do I operate? Number two is actually do the thing. And one more thing, there's a third thing that I really want to make sure I insert in here, which is, from now on, if you find yourself doing something that you feel like you're not supposed to be doing, in my case, I rediscovered Warcraft 2 on DOS from like 1996 or something. And it's been like really nostalgic to go back in and start playing it again. I've been really enjoying it. From now on, if you feel like you're doing something you're not supposed to do, only double down on self-respect. Only double down on respect. And deference, which is to say, if you're doing this thing, then act like, okay, maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe actualizing my potential is involved in doing this in some way. So I'm going to assume that I should be doing this. I'm going to assume that I have to do this. This is necessary for me to do. So that's rule number 3. If you feel like you're doing something that you would judge yourself for doing, but you're just kind of doing it despite your best effort, then become congruent with it. And then through these 3 things, you should see some pretty interesting stuff happen in your life. Again, let us know, let me know, write a comment, please leave a like. If you're interested in getting coached, let me know. You can have a session for $5, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.